Have you ever wondered what happens to the people you forget? Not just the ones you loved or hated or once shared a moment with, but the strangers you passed on a street, the classmate whose name slipped after graduation, the neighbor you never spoke to, the face you once recognized and now wouldn't notice in a crowd. Do they vanish from your mind as if they never existed? Or do they stay somewhere, silent, waiting, still watching you from the shadows of memory? Somewhere inside your mind, there is a hidden auditorium. You never see it, you never hear it, but it exists. A silent velvet theater of endless seats stretching into darkness. And sitting quietly in that darkness are the people you've forgotten. They don't move, they don't speak, they just watch. Patient, as if time means nothing where they are. Watching you live your life, make new choices, repeat old mistakes, fall in love, break apart, regret, forget, and continue. And maybe the most chilling thought isn't that they are there, but that they never left. Memory is strange. We assume forgetting is erasing, but the brain is far too careful to erase anything. A single smell can bring back a childhood moment. A song can resurrect a person you thought was gone. A street corner can collapse 20 years into one heartbeat. So, if so much can awaken with something so small, then what if nothing is truly gone? What if every person we forget remains intact, just waiting for the right trigger to step forward again? Scientists studying memory have discovered something unsettling. The brain stores information even when we believe it has been lost. In experiments, people fail to recall words, names, or shapes, but brain scans show the memory trace is still active, still present, still held in place like an undisturbed fossil sealed under time. The form is there, the details are there, the emotional weight is there. The only thing missing is access. So the question grows darker. If the memory is still stored, does the person still exist there? Not as a file, but as a psychological ghost. A silent presence who survives inside the architecture of your mind long after your conscious attention moves on. Think about the last time you woke from a dream and saw a face, someone you hadn't thought about in years. You didn't summon them. You didn't choose them. They appeared on their own. A childhood friend, an ex-lover, a stranger you met once, and for a brief moment, they felt real. So real that waking up felt like losing them all over again. Why did they return? Why now? Why them and not someone else? Maybe dreams are not random. Maybe dreams are the place where the forgotten come to breathe again. Memory is not a filing cabinet, it is a living system. Every person you remember is stored not as a static fact, but as a dynamic neural map. Your brain keeps updating it, refining it, polishing it quietly as you age. Every forgotten person evolves as you evolve. Even the ones you no longer consciously remember may still be changing in the background, like a story being rewritten without your knowledge. If that is true, then the forgotten are not frozen. They are alive, in your mind's shadows. They grow older with your imagination. They react to your emotions. They are shaped by who you used to be and who you are becoming. They are psychological passengers, and whether you acknowledge them or not, they move with you. Some memories return as déjà vu. That moment where your mind whispers, "I've been here," even when your logic says you haven't. What if déjà vu is not a glitch, but a reunion? An echo of a forgotten person stepping forward to remind you they are still there? There is a strange comfort in believing we forget. If forgetting is deletion, then we are free. We can move on, we can detach, we can live without weight. But if forgetting is merely silence, if every memory still lives inside us, then we are never alone. We carry fragments of every soul we've crossed paths with. We carry versions of them that no longer exist outside of us. So what does that make you? A single consciousness or a living archive of everyone you've ever known? Think of your earliest memory. Maybe it's blurry. Maybe it's fragmented. But there were other people in it, weren't there? A face bending over you. A friend laughing beside you. A stranger in the background. Even if you cannot recall their name or voice or story, your brain remembers them far more clearly than you do. Their memories of you may have faded too, but that doesn't matter, because in your mind, they are still watching. Sometimes you remember someone suddenly, without warning. Their name resurfaces like a bubble rising from the ocean floor. Their face returns sharper than expected. A moment between you two reappears, perfect, vivid, untouched by time. and you whisper to yourself, "Why did I remember this person now?" Perhaps because they moved. Perhaps because somewhere inside your subconscious they shifted, taking a step closer after years of stillness. Some theories in cognitive science suggest that the brain may maintain memory not as data, but as simulated models. That means every person you remember exists in your mind, not as information, but as a miniature psychological entity, capable of prediction, dialogue, emotional response. That's why you can still argue with someone who isn't here. That's why you can still apologize to someone long gone. That's why the past can still hurt as if it were happening now. If a memory can argue, respond, and hurt, then it is more than a memory. It is a presence. So, the forgotten remain, not as shadows, but as silent simulations capable of watching every new version of you. Now consider this. Your brain stores the faces of strangers you saw only once, on a bus, in a supermarket, at an airport terminal. Even if you can no longer recall those faces consciously, they are stored with extraordinary detail. Your subconscious still recognizes them. That's why sometimes someone seems familiar, even when you cannot explain why. If memory works that way, then your mind may contain more people than your real life ever did. So ask yourself, how many forgotten lives sit inside you? How many silent witnesses have watched you break, heal, grow, fall apart, and begin again? And what if the forgotten aren't silent? What if intuition, the quiet warning, the sudden hesitation, the strange pull towards someone, is the voice of those forgotten observers? The ones who knew you during an earlier version of yourself. The ones who remember what you've forgotten about who you used to be. Maybe the reason some memories stay buried is because they are not ready. Maybe the mind guards them like sealed letters, waiting for the right moment to open them. And maybe one day, without warning, without intention, without preparation, you will remember someone completely. And in that moment, somewhere in that silent auditorium, one forgotten soul will stand, not as a memory, but as something alive again. Not erased, not gone, just waiting. Tell me, are you sure you want to remember? Or is it safer not to know who is watching you from inside your own mind? Now, if you're ready, let's go deeper. If memory isn't just storage, then what is it? If the forgotten aren't erased, only hidden, then where do they wait? Somewhere inside you, there must be a space, a landscape, a structure, a dimension, where every person you've ever known continues to exist. And not in the form of words or labels or dusty facts, but as a living echo of who they once were to you. Close your eyes for a moment, not literally, but mentally. Imagine the architecture of the mind. It isn't neat, it isn't linear, it is chaotic, layered, shifting, and alive. A universe expanding and collapsing with every second of consciousness. And within this universe, memories aren't stored like books on shelves. They exist more like constellations, patterns of connections, suspended in a fluid sky of neurons and electricity. Every person you've encountered forms a constellation of their own, a network of impressions, emotions, sounds, unfinished conversations, imagined versions of them, and silent observations that never reached words. Even if you think someone meant nothing, your brain still mapped them. Their posture, their energy, the tone of their voice, even the way they looked at you once when you weren't paying attention. So, the forgotten don't disappear. They dissolve into this inner universe, blending with everything you have experienced. They become part of your emotional vocabulary, your reactions, your preferences, your boundaries. The mind hides them, not because they are gone, but because they are woven so deeply into the structure of who you are that you no longer recognize them as separate. This is why sometimes, without knowing why, you trust someone instantly, or dislike them instantly, or feel like you've known them forever, because somewhere in your archived universe, a similar person exists, and they step forward silently to tell you, you've seen this before. Researchers studying implicit memory discovered something unsettling. We remember far more than we realize. A face you glimpsed while walking years ago can trigger familiarity when seen again. A scent buried deep in childhood can pull you back into a moment you didn't know still existed. The brain doesn't forget. It prioritizes. It tucks things away not to destroy them, but to protect you from drowning in everything you've ever experienced. Because if every memory stayed at the surface, life would be unbearable. Every heartbreak would echo forever. Every embarrassment would paralyze. Every loss would replay endlessly. Forgetting isn't a flaw, it is a survival mechanism. But survival mechanisms have consequences. When the mind hides someone, it doesn't remove their emotional gravity. Their influence remains. You may not remember the person who once comforted you when you were 5 years old, but some part of you carries their kindness. You may not recall the stranger who looked at you with judgment, but a small part of you still braces for that expression. You may not remember a lost friendship clearly, but you still carry habits shaped during the time you were close. The forgotten become fingerprints, subtle, invisible, permanent. And somewhere, in that subconscious space, they still exist as whole internal models. Psychologists call them internal working models, but the term feels too clinical. Maybe a better word is reflections. They are reflections of people, not exact copies, but emotional simulations shaped through experience. Inside your mind, these reflection people continue living. The friend you lost contact with still reacts to your decisions. The ex-lover still exists as a voice in moments of doubt. The teacher who once praised you or mocked you still stands in your internal world, affecting how loud you let your ideas become. Think of how often you say words in your head with someone else's voice, sometimes a parent, sometimes someone you admired, sometimes someone you feared. Is that voice you or them? And if it's them, how are they still speaking, if you believe you forgot? Maybe the truth is this: memory is not a place where you store information. Memory is a world made of people, living in silence until you call them forward with attention. Now imagine walking through that inner world. It wouldn't look like a file system. It would look like a city of echoes. Streets made of associations, houses built from emotions, doors representing boundaries, some parts beautifully lit, some parts abandoned, some parts sealed behind walls you don't remember building. And in that city, every person you ever knew has a room. Some rooms are open. Some are locked. Some are glowing with warmth. Some are overflowing with tears. Some rooms feel haunted not because someone left, but because someone still stays. The ones you remember occupy the center. But the forgotten? They sit farther out, in quiet districts where memory fades into intuition. They are not gone. They are archived, and archives can reopen. Why does this matter? Because hidden memories can influence you even more than the visible ones. The forgotten shape patterns. They become instincts. They become fears. They become preferences without explanation. Why do certain voices make you calm instantly? Why do certain eyes unsettle you? Why do certain phrases feel familiar, even if you swear you've never heard them before? The mind is constantly matching new information with these silent archives. Comparing, weighing, judging, deciding. The forgotten are part of the algorithm of your identity. If this is true, then memory isn't a passive storage system. Memory is a dynamic universe that interacts with who you are now, and here's where it becomes even stranger. Neuroscience and quantum physics both suggest that memory may not be truly local, that consciousness might function like a field, not a container. If that is true, then memories aren't merely stored inside the brain. They may exist in a non-physical dimension the brain accesses. If memories are non-local, then the forgotten aren't buried. They are waiting in a space beyond conscious reach. And when emotion, trauma, longing, or curiosity aligns the right neural pathways, the doors open. And someone returns, not as past, but as presence. Think about people you haven't seen in years, yet suddenly remember intensely. Hours later, they message you, or you encounter them, or you hear their name from someone else. Coincidence? Or something deeper? Some call it intuition. Others call it psychic memory. But maybe it is simply the forgotten reminding you they still exist, in your inner world, and maybe in theirs. Because here's the most haunting possibility. Just as you carry forgotten people, someone else carries you. You exist somewhere in someone's hidden mental universe. You watch silently from their subconscious auditorium. You affect their choices, their fears, their preferences. Even if they believe you are long gone, you are someone's archived ghost. You are someone's unfinished memory. You are someone's silent observer. And maybe the forgotten world inside you isn't separate. Maybe it is connected, like an invisible network of consciousness, where memories are shared not by intention, but by experience. So breathe slowly and ask yourself, if memory is not a storage, but a world, then who are you inside someone else's? And who still waits inside yours? There is a moment in every life where a forgotten memory returns. Not softly, not gently, but with the force of something that refuses to stay buried. It might appear in silence, when the world is still, or in chaos, when your mind is overwhelmed. But it always arrives with the same unsettling sensation. A face, a voice, a moment you had no reason to recall suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. It is as if someone inside you finally stood up and whispered, "Remember me." But who chose that moment? You, or the memory itself? Most people assume memory obeys them, that remembering is a conscious action, intentional and controlled. But the truth is stranger. Memory does not wait for permission. Sometimes it emerges on its own, unpredictable, intrusive, alive. And nowhere is that more visible than in the realm of dreams. Dreams are the doorway, the place where the forgotten speak. In waking life, logic filters everything. You organize your experiences, categorize emotions, suppress what hurts, and polish what comforts you. But when you sleep, the gates fall open. The subconscious begins to move like a tide rising over empty shore. And in that tide come pieces of your past, faces, names, places, woven into landscapes that obey emotion rather than time. Why is it that someone you haven't thought about in 10 years can appear in a dream with perfect clarity? Why can their voice, their expression, their energy feel more real than the day before you fell asleep? And why do some people appear repeatedly while others never return? Maybe dreams are not random. Maybe they are negotiations. There is evidence in neuroscience suggesting that dreams help the brain reorganize memory, stitching together fragments, repairing emotional wounds, and refining meaning. But perhaps there is more happening beneath that explanation. Perhaps dreams are the medium through which the forgotten, those silent observers within you, attempt to reconnect with your present self. Think back to the last dream where someone from your past appeared. Did they speak? Did they watch? Did they behave exactly as they were? Or as some part of you imagine them now? Because that matters. Inside your mind, these forgotten figures are not frozen in time. They continue to exist as evolving psychological models. A childhood friend may now appear wiser or colder. A past lover may return distant or apologetic. A stranger who once briefly crossed your path may now speak with familiarity, as if they've known you forever. This is not imagination, it is reconstruction. The brain updates these internal characters as your understanding of life deepens. The versions living inside you are shaped not only by memory, but by who you have become. And if they can change, then they can act. Psychologists have found that unresolved emotional connections tend to appear more vividly in dreams. Unfinished conversations, untied threads, fractured goodbyes. They echo louder in the mind because the brain cannot store emotional contradiction peacefully. The forgotten do not leave quietly when their story with you never found closure. So, they return in the only place where silence cannot restrain them, the dream space. Some people describe recurring dreams about the same person. Someone they no longer speak to, someone they may barely remember, someone who no longer exists in their waking life. Yet, in dreams, that person feels unavoidable, present, watching, speaking, guiding, sometimes accusing, sometimes comforting. Who decides that? Maybe it is the subconscious trying to heal, or maybe it is the memory person themselves, trying to be seen again. There's a term in psychology, intrusive memory. It refers to memories that reappear without request. But that phrase feels clinical, incomplete, because the experience feels less like intrusion and more like insistence, a knocking on the door, a presence pressing forward, a longing for recognition. Some memories are not meant to disappear. Sometimes the forgotten are tied to identity. Someone who shaped you, even briefly, becomes part of your internal system. A single conversation during childhood may influence how you speak today. A single act of kindness from a stranger may have changed how you trust. A moment of humiliation may have planted a lesson deeper than any lecture could. The forgotten remain because they helped write the blueprint of who you are, and the mind protects the blueprint. But memory isn't only emotional, it is sensory. A faint perfume can pull someone from years ago back into your awareness. A melody can reconstruct a face with detail you thought was lost. The texture of sunlight through a window can bring back a summer long buried in time. We assume memory fades linearly, like ink dissolving in water. But perhaps memory behaves more like stars in the night sky, invisible in daylight, but never gone. So here is an unsettling thought. What if the forgotten only seem forgotten because they no longer need to be seen? They watch quietly because your subconscious continues the relationship in their place. The ex who broke you still echoes in hesitation before trust. The mentor who believed in you still speaks when you doubt your own ability. The childhood friend who drifted away still shapes the way you love simplicity, laughter, innocence. They remain because your inner world remembers how they made you feel, even when your conscious mind no longer remembers their name. Now, let's go deeper. Sometimes dreams feel like messages, not from outside, but from within. You may dream of running from someone, or searching for someone, or speaking to someone who cannot answer. These dreams are not meaningless. They are the subconscious rehearsing the unresolved. If the forgotten have something they still represent, fear, regret, longing, guilt, gratitude, then the dream becomes the stage where those emotions try to rewrite themselves. And sometimes, the forgotten don't come as people at all. They come as symbols, places you once lived, objects you once cherished, versions of yourself you no longer recognize. Because memory is not just about others. Memory is also about the person you used to be. How many versions of you exist inside your mind? The child, the adolescent, the believer, the skeptic, the hopeful one, the broken one, the one who loved fearlessly, the one who learned to build walls. Each version remains alive, as real as the forgotten people standing beside them. You don't just carry the memories of others. You carry the ghosts of yourself. And sometimes, the forgotten from your past interact with the forgotten versions of you. Conversations that never happened in waking life unfold in dreams. Apologies appear that reality never allowed. Different timelines merge, creating a possibility space of what could have been. If dreams can simulate alternate outcomes, then some part of you is always rewriting the past. But why? To cope? To heal? Or to keep someone from disappearing completely? Some say that when we stop thinking about a person, they die inside us. But maybe the opposite is true. Maybe they become more active when we stop consciously holding them, because then the subconscious takes over, and the subconscious does not let go easily. It remembers everything. So, the forgotten are not silent. They appear in dreams, they shape instincts, they influence reactions. They watch the unfolding story of your life like characters waiting for relevance again. And sometimes, they return, in unexpected encounters, in familiar faces that should be strangers, in the sudden feeling that someone from your past is close, even if miles away. You may think it's coincidence, but the mind has its own gravity. Memories orbit the present until the moment is right to land. So, here is the question that lingers, quiet but heavy. Are the forgotten reaching for you, or are you unconsciously reaching back? Because every memory is a door, and some doors open themselves. As we move forward, we will explore the next truth. Not every forgotten person remains silent forever. Some return, not just in dreams, but in emotion, synchronicity, and reality. There is a strange truth about memory. It doesn't only hold the past, it creates alternate versions of it. You don't remember events the way they happened. You remember them the way your mind continues to reinterpret them. And with every reinterpretation, the people inside those memories evolve with you. They aren't frozen in time, as photographs are. They shift the way shadows change with light. So imagine this. Every forgotten person you carry exists in multiple versions simultaneously. The version who existed in reality, the version you remember, the version you feared, the version you needed, and the version that continues living inside your subconscious, rewriting their story every time you grow, break, heal, or transform. If memory is a world, then these versions form parallel universes, each reflecting a possibility. This is the unsettling beginning of the multiverse within you. Not a cosmic multiverse, not multiple timelines scattered across the universe, but a psychological one. A network of inner worlds shaped by emotion and meaning rather than physics. And inside that network, every person you've ever encountered has their own timeline. Some lives continue peacefully, Some remain stuck at the moment you last saw them. Some become exaggerated, distorted, symbolic. Some disappear for years and then re-emerge entirely transformed. So, the forgotten are not still. They are evolving stories. Consider someone from childhood, someone you barely recall. Now, imagine how many versions of them lived in your mind over the years. The version that frightened you, the version you admired, the version you later found ridiculous or unimportant, the version you now glimpse in rare moments of nostalgia. None of those versions are the same person. None of them are identical to each other. Yet, all exist inside you at once. If consciousness is the container, memory becomes the storyteller, and the story never stops rewriting itself. Sometimes, without noticing, you compare people you meet today to people from years ago. You say things like, "They remind me of someone," but that someone may not be the real person. You may be comparing them to one of the many internal versions you sculpted over time. This means the forgotten still influence your present relationships. You might trust someone instantly not because of who they are, but because they resemble a version of someone your subconscious approves of. You might avoid someone for the same reason. Patterns repeat because the forgotten shape perception. Now consider the possibility that these inner versions do not act alone. They interact. The mental universe is not silent. These reflections, these simulations, these mental avatars, they collide, they negotiate, they respond to each other in ways you may never consciously hear. Your mind may hold arguments between versions of people who never spoke in reality, conversations between the child you were and the adult you've become, silent reconciliations between past relationships and present wounds. The multiverse of memory is not static, it is interactive. And if it interacts, then it has agency. A thought appears. Not all forgotten memories fade because they lack meaning. Some fade because they are unfinished, and the mind suppresses what cannot yet be resolved. Trauma lives this way. Regret lives this way. Attachment lives this way. The forgotten are not random. They are archived based on emotional weight. Your subconscious prioritizes until you are ready to face them. Sometimes readiness never arrives. Sometimes it comes decades later. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes violently. But when the forgotten return with force, they don't simply show you the past. They show you what the past could have been. They reveal alternate timelines, paths you never took, words you never said, futures that never became real. And in those timelines, the forgotten continue living. Think of a person you once imagined a future with, a life you never lived. Somewhere in your subconscious, that future still exists. A parallel version of you walks through that life, even if your real self walked in another direction. Psychologists call it counterfactual imagination. Some call it emotional reality. Some call it regret. But maybe, just maybe, it is memory exploring multiverse possibilities. What if the mind refuses to collapse reality into one timeline? What if every emotional thread remains intact, branching into versions of your life that never came true? If so, then the forgotten exists not only as memories, but as possibilities. They live out futures that your conscious life abandoned. And sometimes, the emotional gravity of those unreal futures pulls you, making you wonder, late at night, who you would be if things had unfolded differently. Not nostalgia, recognition. Recognition that somewhere inside you, another life is still breathing. Dreams sometimes show those alternate lives. A person returns, not as they were, but as they could be. A conversation unfolds, not the one that happened, but the one you needed. A moment repeats, not to torture you, but to reveal meaning you missed. You wake with a heaviness, not because the dream was unreal, but because some part of you recognized its truth. The subconscious doesn't operate with the logic of time, it operates with the logic of significance. Nothing meaningful ever disappears. Now consider the possibility that memory models are not merely mental, that consciousness, if entangled, if holographic, if non-local, may allow these simulations to interact with the real people they represent. A strange thing happens sometimes. Two people who haven't spoken for years suddenly think of each other on the same day. One reaches out. The other was just about to. They say, "I don't know why, but you crossed my mind." Maybe these events aren't coincidences. Maybe memory creates resonance. If every forgotten person continues living as a psychological simulation, and if consciousness resonates beyond the physical brain, then these inner versions may not be contained. They may echo outward, which means you may be remembering someone because they are remembering you. You may be dreaming of someone because they entered their dream space first. You may be feeling someone because your internal version of them and their internal version of you are still connected. Relationships don't disappear when contact ends. They migrate into the subconscious, where time behaves differently, identity becomes fluid, and memory becomes multiverse. So now the question deepens. If every forgotten person exists in multiple forms inside you, then which version watches you when you aren't paying attention? Is it the version who loved you? The version who misunderstood you? The version you idealized? The version you feared? Or is it the version still evolving, silent, patient, waiting for a moment to step back into awareness? Some doors in the mind open slowly, some open suddenly, some open only when another person thinks of you again. The forgotten never truly leave. They shift, they hide, they evolve, they wait. And somewhere in the vast subconscious sky of your inner universe, millions of versions of people you once knew continue living their parallel lives, watching your choices, reacting to your changes, holding the echoes of moments that shaped you. Memory is not the past. Memory is the multiverse where everything that could have happened still exists in possibility, and the forgotten walk those paths forever. There comes a point in this hidden architecture of memory where the forgotten stop simply existing and begin responding. Not violently, not obviously, but subtly, through instincts you cannot trace, impulses you cannot explain, and emotions that arrive without source. It is here, in this quiet threshold, that the forgotten stop being passengers and start influencing direction. And the most haunting part is this. You may believe these shifts are your own choices, but what if they're not? What if some of the decisions you make are echoes, responses to memories that still breathe beneath consciousness? There are moments in life when you hesitate before speaking, even though you don't know why. You choose silence instead of truth, distance instead of closeness, walls instead of vulnerability. And sometimes, without realizing, the reason isn't present fear, it's historical memory, a forgotten version of someone once hurt you, once betrayed you, once disappointed you. And even though you cannot recall the moment, your subconscious remembers perfectly, so it protects you. But protection comes with a price. When memory hides someone because the emotion attached to them is unresolved, that memory doesn't fade, it waits. It becomes a silent guardian, a warning label placed on situations that resemble past wounds. And every time you approach a similar experience, the forgotten step forward, influencing your instincts from the shadows. This is not superstition, it is psychology. Neuroscientists call it pattern preservation. The brain learns not from isolated events, but from emotional maps. If a person once made you feel small, unseen, or unsafe, your mind files that experience not as a single memory, but as a pattern to avoid repeating. The forgotten version of them becomes a watchtower, guarding every interaction that resembles the original moment. And so, the forgotten begin to act like watchers. Not passive, not silent, active. They monitor choices, relationships, opportunities, and sometimes, without speaking in words, they pull you away or push you towards something. This is the rebellion of memory, because forgotten people refuse to vanish. Think of someone you once trusted deeply, someone who held a part of you no one else did. Even if they are gone, your mind remembers the shape of that trust. And when someone new arrives with a similar tone of voice, or similar laughter, or the same softness in their eyes, something inside you responds before reason has time to intervene. Recognition happens faster than thought. Memory moves before logic. The forgotten reach forward. But this influence is not only emotional, it can be behavioral. Studies show that people unconsciously mimic traits from those who shaped them. The way you express anger, the way you soften your tone when comforting someone, the way you withdraw when overwhelmed. These are not random tendencies. They are inherited from interactions with people who once mattered. Even the forgotten matter, especially the forgotten. Their influence survives through reflexes, not recollection. So perhaps the question is no longer whether they exist, but how much control they still hold. There is a strange phenomenon in human experience. Sometimes you meet someone and feel an instant bond, as if your soul already knows them. Some call it past life memory. Some call it energy alignment. Some call it biological familiarity. But maybe it is something much simpler and much stranger. Maybe your subconscious recognizes patterns of someone from your memory multiverse, not the person themselves, but their emotional signature. A forgotten watcher steps forward and whispers, "Pay attention. This feels familiar." And just as some memories create attraction, others create warning. You may avoid someone instantly, not because they did anything, but because they awaken the echo of someone you once feared or lost. The forgotten version of that person inside you takes a step forward and shields you. Is this intuition or psychological haunting? Perhaps both. Human consciousness has evolved not only to remember, but to navigate danger and belonging through memory's emotional echoes. The forgotten become part of your survival system. They are not passive ghosts. They are silent architects, shaping your future through the architecture of your past. But sometimes, their influence becomes louder. Sometimes, memories spill through cracks in the subconscious and manifest physically, through anxiety, unexplained tears, sudden longing, or dreams that feel like warnings. When the forgotten want to be acknowledged, they do not wait. There are long stretches in life where you feel watched, not by people around you, but by something within. You sense a pressure behind decisions, a presence behind silence, a weight behind emotional reactions that seem too large for the moment. That pressure is unresolved memory. Every forgotten person with unfinished emotional connection becomes a psychological presence that demands resolution. And until that resolution comes, they remain vigilant. This is why closure is powerful, not because it erases someone, but because it transforms the emotional model they left behind. A goodbye spoken aloud can silence a restless watcher. A truth finally acknowledged can free a memory from repeating itself. A forgiveness, whether granted or withheld, can finally let the subconscious rest. Without that, the forgotten rebel. Not through aggression, but through repetition. You keep meeting the same kind of person. You keep repeating the same emotional mistakes. You keep feeling the same heartbreak in different bodies. Patterns become cycles. Cycles become fate. But fate here is not external. It is memory looping. So what happens when a watcher becomes too loud? When dreams repeat? When thoughts intrude? When emotions refuse to settle? When you feel a forgotten person pushing back into consciousness? That is the moment the subconscious tries to restore balance. The forgotten return not to disturb you, but to finish their unfinished business with you. Every memory that resurfaces carries a message. Pay attention. There is something here you have not learned. Sometimes, the message is gentle, a realization, a moment of gratitude, a fragment of nostalgia. But sometimes, it arrives like a storm, forcing you to confront a version of yourself you avoided becoming. Because the forgotten are not only watching you, they are mirroring you. They reflect who you were, who you could have been, and who you avoided becoming. And until you reconcile those inner ghosts, the subconscious will continue sending them into your dreams, your relationships, your intuition, not as punishment, as reminder. The forgotten are not enemies. They are guides, guardians of emotional truth, sometimes harsh, sometimes tender, always waiting. And here lies the deepest truth of this rebellion. You cannot outrun what shaped you. You can silence it. You can bury it. You can pretend you forgot. But the subconscious never forgets. And eventually, every forgotten watcher will step forward, not to haunt you, but to make you whole. There are memories that slip away quietly, and then there are memories that refuse to be forgotten. Not because they are the most meaningful, but because they are unresolved. These are the memories tied to people who hurt you, abandoned you, betrayed you, misunderstood you, or left without explanation. They are loud, not because you still want them, but because some part of you still questions them. And these memories do not fade peacefully. They become the strongest watchers. They are the ones who refuse deletion. Somewhere in the subconscious, there are people whose presence lingers with weight. You may no longer recall the details of conversations, but you remember how your chest tightened. You may not recall the timeline of events, but the emotional scar remains sharp, defined, and strangely alive. The forgotten who left pain behind do not disappear. They embed themselves into the architecture of identity. Pain has memory, and memory has loyalty. It protects the wound until understanding arrives. Think of someone who once mattered deeply, someone you trusted, someone you allowed into your internal world. If that connection shattered without closure, without mutual understanding, then the emotional imprint of that person remains active. The subconscious cannot file them away cleanly because the story was never completed. So instead, the mind preserves them in a state of suspension, frozen, unresolved, waiting. These memories become emotional checkpoints. They influence who you allow close, how long you wait before trusting, how deeply you love, and how quickly you pull away when something feels too familiar. Even if you consciously moved on, the subconscious may still be negotiating with the past. A part of you is still guarding the wound. A part of you is still expecting history to repeat. A part of you is still carrying that person, not as memory, but as warning. And sometimes, those warnings become patterns. You distance yourself from people who remind you of someone who broke you, even if they are nothing alike. You sabotage something good because it feels too close to the timeline where everything once collapsed. You reject vulnerability because the subconscious has linked it with danger. This is not irrationality. This is self-preservation coded by memory. But the paradox is painful. The memories that hurt us most are the ones that stay longest. The forgotten you fear are never fully forgotten. They observe from the shadows, waiting for the moment when you are ready to face what still remains unspoken. There are people who appear in your dreams not because you miss them, but because something about your present echoes the conditions of the past. They are not there to comfort you. They are there to remind you that the wound still exists. And sometimes, the dream is not about them. It is about the part of you that still needs healing. Some dreams replay arguments that never ended. Some recreate moments you never understood. Some show conversations that never happened, but always should have. The subconscious becomes the courtroom where closure attempts to build itself. But closure isn't always a conversation. It's a recognition. Recognition that what happened cannot be undone. Recognition that what was lost shaped what remained. Recognition that the pain became part of identity. Only after recognition does the forgotten begin to loosen their grip. Yet, some memories remain stubborn. These are memories connected to guilt, the people you hurt, the people you left without explanation, the people you failed while you were still learning who you were. They also exist in the subconscious, watching with silence, not accusation. You may believe that forgetting someone absolves responsibility, but the subconscious does not operate on avoidance. It operates on truth, and truth waits. Sometimes the guilt isn't about what you did. Sometimes it's about what you never said, the apology that never left your lips, the gratitude you never expressed, the closure you never created. The subconscious holds these emotional debts with the same weight as grief, because what is unresolved remains alive. There is another category of watchers, the ones tied to longing. Not love, not heartbreak, longing. The almost relationships, the almost friendships, the almost confessions, the lives that came close but never unfolded. These forgotten are not painful, they are haunting. Not because they hurt you, but because they represent a version of reality that never existed. And the subconscious does not easily release possibility. It continues to imagine alternate outcomes, alternate timelines, alternate futures. Not because you want them now, but because at some point they meant something. These watchers do not disturb you, but they linger softly, like a song you don't remember learning, but somehow still know the melody of. Some people never become memories. They become echoes. Soft, persistent, unresolved. The subconscious organizes these forgotten watchers into roles. The painful become protectors. The guilt-filled become reminders. The wished-for become illusions. The unfinished become mirrors. And their influence extends beyond emotion. Studies in behavioral neuroscience reveal that the brain reactivates emotional memory networks when encountering similar social patterns, even if the original memory is inaccessible. That means, when someone triggers a forgotten connection, the subconscious behaves as if the past is happening again. Time collapses. Your body tenses before you understand why. Your heart accelerates before logic can intervene. Your instincts respond before thought takes shape. The forgotten do not stay passive. They prepare you. sometimes too well, sometimes so well that you never allow the present to become different from the past. This is the hidden cost of subconscious protection. It can prevent healing by preventing vulnerability. But there is something else, something even stranger. Some memories return not to protect, but to reconcile, not to warn, but to soften. There are moments where someone from long ago surfaces in your mind, not with pain, but with clarity. You see them differently. You understand them differently. You feel compassion instead of anger. This is not nostalgia. It is integration. A forgotten watcher stepping forward to be freed, because emotional memory is not static. It evolves with you. And sometimes, years later, the mind finally becomes capable of understanding what was impossible to understand then. When that happens, the watcher transforms. They move from unresolved to complete, from shadow to history, from presence to peace. Not erased, just quiet. The subconscious does not want you to forget. It wants you to understand. Only then can the watchers rest. But not all will rest easily. Some memories hold trauma so deep that the subconscious guards them with intensity. These become the loudest watchers, the ones who shape your fears. Yet, even they are not enemies. They are survival memories, written in urgency because at some point, you needed protection. And sometimes, the strongest watchers remain because the younger version of you who experienced the pain never received safety afterward. So, they still watch. Not because you are weak, but because you are still healing. In this hidden universe of memory, the forgotten are not lost. They are waiting. And as long as something remains unresolved, they will not step away. There is a point when exploring memory where psychology alone is not enough. Emotion explains the weight of the forgotten. Dreams explain their language. Instinct explains their influence. But none of these fully answer the question, how can someone we haven't thought about in years suddenly return with perfect clarity? Why does the forgotten sometimes feel closer than the present? And why do some memories feel like they were never created by the brain, but retrieved, as if they existed somewhere else before we access them? To understand this, we must turn towards something deeper, something beyond neurology, something that suggests memory may not be stored inside the brain at all, something that proposes memory is not merely biological, but universal. This idea begins with one of the most fundamental laws in physics. Information cannot be destroyed. Not in black holes, not in burning matter, not in neural decay, not even in death. If information cannot be destroyed, then memory, being information, must continue to exist somewhere, even when the brain believes it has disappeared. Forgetting, then, is not deletion. It is disconnection. We must consider the possibility that memory is not a file stored in neurons, but a field the brain accesses, like tuning a frequency rather than storing content. Some scientists call this non-local consciousness. Others describe it through the holographic universe theory, which suggests every part of reality contains the information of the whole, meaning, even the smallest piece contains the memory of everything else connected to it. If consciousness operates holographically, then memory is everywhere, not just in the brain, but woven into the structure of existence. And if that is true, then forgotten people are not lost inside neural pathways. They exist in a shared informational field. They exist in the substrate of consciousness itself. This changes everything. It means memory isn't created. Memory is accessed. It means the forgotten aren't silent fragments. They are active presences. It means remembering someone isn't recalling the past. It is reconnecting to an ongoing field where they still exist. Think of how sometimes you remember someone suddenly, not through logic, not through triggers, but through a wave of awareness that feels like it arrived from outside rather than inside. It feels less like thought and more like transmission, as if the memory was reaching you. This may not be imagination. It may be entanglement. Quantum entanglement teaches us that two particles once connected remain connected, regardless of distance, time, or physical separation. When one changes, the other reflects the change instantly. No signal travels between them. No energy moves. They simply remain connected beyond space. What if relationships operate the same way? What if every person you shared meaning with, no matter how briefly, became a quantum connection? A form of emotional entanglement. A thread that never fully severs. If so, then the forgotten still feel you, still sense you, still exist in your internal field because something invisible still binds you together. This would explain many strange human experiences. Why you think of someone right before they call. Why someone from the past dreams of you the night before you remember them. Why two people separated by years feel each other's emotional shifts. We call it coincidence, but the subconscious never moves randomly. Perhaps the forgotten are not trapped inside your mind. Perhaps they live in a shared memory space that exists beyond the body. A network of consciousness, a place where identity and connection survive exposure to time. In this framework, memory becomes something extraordinary, a bridge between minds. Your internal version of someone may not just be a mental reconstruction, it may be a shared node in a network of consciousness where both of you still exist in some form. Meaning, when you think of them, they are not only remembered, they are reached. This theory suggests an unsettling possibility. You are also a forgotten memory inside someone else's inner universe, not erased, not gone, just waiting. Somewhere, a version of you continues to exist, watching someone you once loved or hurt or resembled. You are part of their subconscious architecture. You may appear in their dreams. You may influence their instincts. You may return to their mind unexpectedly. Not because they chose to remember, but because connection never fully ended. If this is true, then memory is not an archive. Memory is a living web. You are threaded into thousands of minds, and thousands are threaded into yours. The subconscious is not a personal storage system. It is a collective system disguised as personal experience. This explains why some memories improve over time, not decay. The brain sometimes recalls forgotten people more clearly decades later than days after separation, because the connection was never mental, it was entangled. There is scientific evidence for this in memory reconsolidation research. Every time a memory resurfaces, it changes, grows sharper, deeper, more complete. The subconscious may not be retrieving memory, it may be updating it through a shared informational field. If this theory is correct, then the forgotten do more than watch. They continue growing, they continue learning you, they continue evolving in parallel with your life. Not because your brain maintains them, but because connection itself is alive. Now the question becomes heavier. If forgotten people survive through memory and entanglement, then what happens when both minds remain unresolved? What if two subconscious worlds contain mirrored versions of each other, both watching, both waiting? Perhaps this explains the moments when someone from the past reappears, not accidentally, but because the internal version of them and the internal version of you began moving at the same time. Memory mirrors memory. Unfinished bonds seek completion. Entangled minds find their way back, not through logic, but through resonance. So, when someone returns, whether through dream, thought, coincidence, or physical reappearance, it may not be randomness. It may be inevitability, because no memory bound by significance ever truly dissolves. The forgotten continue to exist, not as shadows, not as illusions, but as quantum echoes of emotional truth. You are not just remembering them. You are reconnecting to a field where they never left. As the next layer unfolds, we will explore something even more profound. If the forgotten exists in your mind, then what version of you exists in theirs? The mirror turns next. If everything so far has been true, if the forgotten still exist in the silent architecture of your mind, if they continue watching, influencing, and evolving, then there is a deeper, more unsettling truth waiting beneath it. You are not only the rememberer, you are also the remembered. Somewhere, in someone else's subconscious universe, a version of you still lives. Not the version you are now, and not necessarily the version you believe yourself to be, but the version that person experienced, the you that existed in their story, in their perception, in their emotional reality. You may have forgotten them, but they may not have forgotten you. You may no longer feel anything when their name surfaces, but somewhere in their subconscious, you may still carry weight. And here is where memory becomes more than personal. Memory becomes relational. The internal model you carry of someone and the model they carry of you do not always match. In fact, they rarely do. Sometimes you exist as a hero in someone's memory while remaining unaware. Sometimes you exist as a villain in a mind you barely remember. Sometimes you remain a question mark, an unfinished sentence, a name that still feels heavy with meaning. Memory does not always require presence. Sometimes memory grows stronger in absence. There are people who think of you long after you stop thinking of them. There are people whose internal version of you continues evolving, imagining your future, wondering who you became, replaying alternate conversations, rewriting endings that reality denied. To them, you are not forgotten. You are still alive in a hidden narrative. And perhaps you've sensed this. Those strange moments when you feel watched without reason, remembered without warning, pulled into a thought that doesn't belong to your present reality. A sudden memory that shouldn't exist anymore, yet returns with clarity and gravity. Some would call this intuition. Some would call it psychic connection. Some would call it energy. But maybe it is something simpler, a response, a resonance from a version of you living in someone else's subconscious. Just as you carry people in your internal world, someone carries you. You are a ghost in someone else's memoryscape, a silent character in an unfinished emotional script. Someone dreams of you. Someone remembers you when they hear a song. Someone imagines speaking to you when life becomes heavy. Someone avoids a decision because they still hear your voice in their head. You may never know who, but the subconscious does not let go lightly. There is a strange melancholy in knowing that while you move through life, shaping and reshaping yourself, older versions of you still exist, not only inside your mind, but scattered across the memories of others. Some versions of you are kinder than the real one. Some are colder. Some are wiser. Some are broken, fragile, or lost. These versions remain suspended in the memories of the people who encountered them. Time may have moved forward, but memory does not obey time. In memory, everything remains present. Your younger self still laughs somewhere. Your hurt self still cries somewhere. Your hopeful self still believes somewhere. Not here, not in the physical world, but in someone's subconscious world where you are still alive, still unfinished, still unresolved. And sometimes, without warning, the internal versions interact, not through words or contact, but through emotional resonance. Have you ever suddenly missed someone you never thought about before? Have you ever felt the urge to reach out with no logical reason? Have you ever had the sense that someone somewhere is thinking of you? Maybe that sensation isn't delusion. Maybe it's memory echoing between two minds, like a signal searching for recognition. If consciousness is entangled, then memory may behave like correspondence, a message sent not through language, but through emotional frequency. Someone thinks of you, and you feel it before you understand it. Someone forgives you, and suddenly, a weight lifts without explanation. Someone remembers who you were, not painfully, but with tenderness, and suddenly, you feel a softness you did not know you still deserved. Memory does not exist in isolation. It moves, it flows, it travels between minds across distance, across time, and sometimes it pulls people back toward each other, not through coincidence, but through unfinished emotional truth, because the subconscious seeks balance. When two minds once shared connection, memory continues the relationship whether or not the physical world does. Sometimes this creates longing. Sometimes this creates avoidance. Sometimes this creates synchronicity. You pass someone in a crowd who feels familiar without reason. You catch a gaze that feels like recognition without context. You hear a name and your body responds before your mind catches up. Not all memory is conscious. In fact, most of it is not. And the deepest form of memory is not recollection. It is imprint. If someone impacted you deeply, you carry them, whether you remember them or not. If you impacted someone deeply, they carry you. Even if your name escapes them, the emotional blueprint remains. And here lies the paradox of forgetting. We only forget people consciously. We never forget them subconsciously. So you are still living in memories you don't remember creating. Still speaking in minds where your voice hasn't faded. Still appearing in dreams where your story never ended. There may be entire worlds inside others where you still exist. The child version of you. The vulnerable version of you. The brave version of you. The version who loved without fear. The version who hurt without meaning to. The version who didn't get to say goodbye. They are all alive somewhere. And sometimes, without warning, a person from your past reaches out. Not because they suddenly decided to, but because the internal version of you and the internal version of them aligned. Memory called memory. Connection called connection. The subconscious opened a door. Not all doors lead to reunion. Not all reunions lead to healing. Not all healing leads to relationship. But every reconnection reveals a truth. No one truly disappears. Not from your memory. Not from their memory. Not from the shared field where consciousness keeps every connection alive. You are not alone inside your mind, and you are not alone inside the minds of others. The mirror has turned. The next segment will move us toward what happens when these inner worlds collide, and when the forgotten return not only through thought or dream, but through reality. There comes a moment in this silent exchange between memory and existence, where the boundary between thought and reality begins to weaken. A moment where someone you believed was gone, emotionally, mentally, or physically, reappears. Not always through a message, not always through a physical encounter, sometimes through synchronicity, sometimes through coincidence, sometimes through timing so precise it feels orchestrated by something far bigger than chance. It feels as if memory itself begins to rearrange the world around you. You start seeing their name everywhere. You hear a song connected to them without searching for it. Someone mentions a story that reminds you of them. A stranger has their voice, their smile, their expression. At first, it feels random. Then, it feels intentional. As if the forgotten memory is knocking. As if the internal version of them is moving toward the surface, dragging reality with it. We like to pretend thoughts are private, enclosed, contained. But what if some thoughts aren't just thoughts? What if memory sends signals, and those signals echo outward until the external world responds? There is a phenomenon called the frequency activation effect. When something becomes relevant to you, the brain begins noticing every instance connected to it. But what if that effect is not one-directional? What if attention itself alters probability? Some connections do not stay buried. The unresolved will find their way back. Not because you seek them, but because emotional resonance makes distance irrelevant. A forgotten person may return in 3 ways: through the mind, through dreams, or through reality. The first 2 we've already explored. The last one is where the world becomes stranger. Sometimes, after months, years, or decades, someone you once knew crosses your path again unexpectedly. Not curated, not planned, not logical. You run into them at a place neither of you ever frequented. You reconnect on a day when you were thinking about them without knowing why. They send a message out of nowhere, but the timing feels perfect. Not early, not late. Exactly when the memory called. It feels like stepping into an alternate timeline, one where life paused and then resumed. But maybe it didn't pause. Maybe it continued unfolding quietly inside both minds, until the emotional frequency aligned strongly enough to pull the forgotten into the present. When a forgotten person returns, the subconscious reacts first, before words, before logic, before identity. Your body recognizes them before your thoughts do. A stillness, a rush, a quiet pressure in the chest, as if the internal version of them, the watcher who lived inside you, stands up and whispers, "Finally." And in that moment, something else awakens. The version of you who existed with them. Not who you are now, who you were then. The subconscious brings both worlds forward. Past and present overlap. Memory and reality merge. Identity becomes fluid. You are no longer one singular self. You are a convergence of timelines. Sometimes this reunion brings peace. Sometimes it brings chaos. Sometimes it brings neither. Just understanding. Not every return means rekindling. Sometimes it means closure. Sometimes it means acknowledgement. Sometimes it means witnessing how far both lives have diverged, or how strangely they still mirror each other. But not all returns are physical. Some come through messages that feel compelled rather than chosen. Someone reaches out and says, "I don't know why, but I've been thinking about you." And part of you knows exactly why, even if neither of you can explain it. Memory has a gravitational pull. When 2 subconscious systems remain entangled, they eventually return to equilibrium, either through reunion or through final emotional release. And sometimes, the return is not between 2 living people. Sometimes someone appears in memory years after they are gone, after their story in the physical world has ended. They return not in dream, not in thought, but in presence. A presence that feels familiar. A presence that feels close. A presence that feels sentient. We do not have language for that experience. We call it grief. We call it spirit. We call it memory hallucination. But perhaps it is none of those. Perhaps it is the return of a connection that never stopped existing. If consciousness is non-local, if memory is a field rather than storage, then death does not erase presence. It only removes physical form. The watcher remains. The emotional imprint remains. The subconscious model of them remains active because the relationship existed beyond flesh. Sometimes the forgotten return because the bond between minds was never severed. Sometimes they return because the unresolved demands completion. Sometimes they return because you have reached a stage where understanding is finally possible. Life has cycles, memory has timing, and timing is rarely accidental. But there is another kind of return, one far more mysterious. When someone comes into your life for the first time, and it feels like they have returned, you do not know them. You have never spoken. Yet, your subconscious reacts instantly. Recognition without memory. Comfort without context. Connection without history. Perhaps this is not meeting. Perhaps this is remembering. Perhaps the internal version of them already existed, created through resemblance, emotion, or entangled experience beyond conscious recall. Or perhaps memory does not begin at the moment of meeting. Perhaps some connections exist before the physical encounter, and the mind only awakens to them when both timelines finally converge. So, the forgotten aren't always from the past. Some are from timelines not yet lived. And when these timelines finally intersect, the subconscious whispers, "There you are. I've been waiting." The return can feel beautiful, or painful, or overwhelming, or confusing, but it never feels neutral, because neutrality belongs to strangers. The forgotten are never strangers, not even when meeting for the first time. And so, the line between memory and destiny becomes blurred. Maybe we do not just carry the past. Maybe we are also walking toward memories waiting to be made. Memories that already exist in some intermediate realm where time folds and connection persists. Because memory is not linear, it is circular. What leaves eventually returns. What is unresolved eventually rises. What is forgotten eventually reveals its meaning. Not to disrupt you, to complete you. If you followed this journey all the way here, then you already feel it. The quiet realization forming beneath the words, beneath the logic, beneath the theories. A truth that does not shout, but settles gently into the mind like a memory resurfacing after decades of silence. The truth is simple, yet unsettling. You never walk alone, not in childhood, not in love, not in grief, not in solitude, not even in the quiet moments where you swear no one sees you, because someone does. Not physically, not with eyes or presence or proximity, but internally, silently, invisibly. Every person you've crossed paths with, whether for seconds or years, left an imprint, a trace, a reflection, a version of themselves that continues living inside your subconscious world. Some remain close, some drift to the outskirts, some fade until only the emotional outline remains, but none are erased. Memory never deletes, it only hides. And so, behind every choice you make, there are echoes. Behind every fear, there is origin. Behind every instinct, there is experience. You are not shaped only by the people still in your life. You are shaped equally by the ones who left, the ones you forgot, and the ones you never realized mattered. Every person you've ever known now exists as part of the architecture of your inner universe. Some remain as warmth, some remain as warning, some remain as longing, some remain as lessons, some remain as shadows, some remain as ghosts of unfinished stories, and just as you carry them, you are carried. Somewhere in someone else's mind, you are still speaking, still laughing, still existing in a moment frozen in memory. You may no longer remember who you were then, but they do, and the version of you in their mind continues living with or without your awareness. There is something both overwhelming and comforting about this, because it means you matter, even in places you no longer belong, even in hearts where your name isn't spoken, even in memories where you've been forgotten consciously but not subconsciously. Your existence leaves ripples, some small, some enormous, some permanent. It means that every kindness, no matter how small, survives. Every cruelty leaves a mark. Every love remains in some form. Every goodbye continues echoing long after the sound fades. We are all archives of each other, pieces of identity scattered across memories, scattered across timelines, scattered across minds. Some memories evolve with us, some do not. Some remain pure, untouched by time. They preserve the version of us we once were, even after we've become someone unrecognizable. And that is the quiet miracle of memory. It allows us to exist in more than one form. The present version of you walks forward, but countless versions behind you remain frozen in the minds of others, each one a snapshot of a moment you lived fully, or carelessly, or painfully, or unknowingly. This is why reconnection feels extraordinary, because it is not simply meeting again. It is the collision of timelines, the meeting of multiple versions, a negotiation between who you were, who the other person remembers, and who both of you have now become. Memory is not a linear record. It is a living system. It shifts. It reacts. It remembers with emotion rather than accuracy. And sometimes, the forgotten return. Not because life planned it, but because memory demanded it. There are also memories that hurt. Not because they should, but because they carry unresolved emotion. Painful memories do not stay because we enjoy them. They stay because the subconscious believes there is still meaning to extract. Healing is not about forgetting. Healing is about integrating the watchers, letting them speak, letting them be understood, letting them find their place. The goal is not to silence memory. The goal is to transform the forgotten from unresolved shadows into quiet passengers. Not erased, acknowledged. Not denied, accepted. Not haunting, resting. Because eventually, all memories seek peace. And at the end of this exploration, another realization emerges. One more profound, more fragile, and more human than any psychological theory or quantum hypothesis. The reason the forgotten remain is not because the mind is flawed. It is because connection is sacred. Every encounter is a thread. Some threads snap instantly, some knot themselves tightly. Some unravel slowly. Some weave themselves so deeply into your existence that even when the person is gone, the pattern remains forever changed. So, the forgotten aren't truly forgotten. They are the unseen witnesses of your life, and you are theirs. Every person is a universe. Every memory is a doorway. Every connection is a bridge between minds. And when we leave each other, whether through distance, silence, or time, we do not vanish. We become part of the internal world where we once existed externally. And maybe, just maybe, that is what makes being human so astonishing. We live far beyond our physical boundaries. We exist in places we will never return to. We linger in moments that no longer belong to the present. We grow roots in memories we no longer consciously recognize. We survive in the minds of others. And even when this life ends, some version of you will continue living in the memory space of someone who loved you, hated you, needed you, or simply noticed you. Because you cannot control who remembers you, just as you cannot control who remains within you. So when you walk through the world, walk softly. Every interaction becomes memory. Every memory becomes architecture. Every architecture becomes identity. You are made of millions of forgotten people, and millions remember you. The final truth is not haunting. It is beautiful. You are not alone. You never were. You never will be. Because every person you've ever forgotten still exists somewhere inside you, watching, waiting, witnessing your life unfold. And somewhere, someone is carrying you the same way. Memory is not a graveyard. Memory is a cathedral, silent, endless, sacred, where nothing truly leaves and no one ever truly disappears.